situation where some testing's been done here and there, but there's all these questions about the accuracy and the purpose of a lot of that testing. And it has not been, and that testing is not being done with the purpose of answering questions like this lady has raised, which are the same questions that everybody that I've met in the town there and that came to the meeting that I was there were asking very similar questions. And the only way they can be answered is with information driven by testing. You know, going in with a handheld monitor that's looking for a general group of chemicals that hasn't got a very low detection limit is not going to help. It's not useful. It's not going to address these questions. And so instead, that's what people are doing for the company and for EPA, because they're overseeing everything. They're supposedly okaying everything that's being done by the company. But the focus has to change. Even the proposed dioxin sampling plan, for example, that I understand is already in play. The purpose of that testing was not to address the public health risks and questions in the community, but to guide the modeling for the search for where to test for. I mean, that to me is just so off target. But these things are moving forward without input from the community, without input from public health scientists who are working with the community. It's just the company is going forward very quickly to do what they want to do, which is try to eliminate as much of the contamination, move it out of the town or wherever, and leave you all with these questions. I mean, I've experienced this because of my involvement at Love Canal, where the state of New York did much the same thing that is happening here. It's not much different from the governmental response. The response is more addressed towards telling everybody that things are fine, when in fact what people know from their own experiences, from breathing the chemicals, from the symptoms that they're experiencing, that things aren't all fine. But you won't get answers from the government until they decide to get serious and to listen to you all and target their testing to address the questions you have.
Will that ever happen?
Yes, will that ever happen?
I don't know. It never happened at Love Canal. And what happened at Love Canal, how people were able to be able to leave, was that the residents organized. They formed a local group, they got together, they figured out what they wanted, and they created enough public pressure that ultimately the state did what they wanted. They wanted to leave. That was what they wanted. That was their number one demand. We want out. And so it's you know, it took 2 years. Nobody was saying, everybody in the state, for example, was saying, oh, we can't do that. We don't have the money. We don't have this. We can't do that. We don't have the science that justifies it. They had all these reasons why they couldn't do it. But ultimately it was done. And because the federal government got involved and they said that what's happening here is a crime. And what's happening in East Palestine, the way it's being handled, is a crime. It's just, you know, I know there's a couple of representatives from EPA in the audience there. I've worked with EPA for all this for over 40 years. And frankly, while the agency is some people are really good and want to do the right thing, the agency is a political beast. And that's how they operate. It's not just about the science or the public health, it's about the politics. And so, you know, my best advice to the people in the room, people who live there, is to organize as quickly as you can. Because that's the only way the agency will do the things you need to have done to answer your questions. I mean, what I've seen so far, frankly, has just been somewhere between bad and pathetic. And I'm not trying to mince words, I'm not trying to cast aspersions, but for the agency not to have tested for dioxin when a burn of vinyl chloride of 5 tanker trucks occurred over whatever it was, 36 hours or so, they had to know, their scientists certainly knew that this highly toxic chemical was being released into this community. And for there not to be any testing done of the air during that time, to me is just, I don't understand it. The scientists at EPA certainly knew better. I can't speak to the politicians at EPA.
I don't think we really know what cleaning would need to happen to be effective. I mean, there's a real challenge of not even knowing which houses have any contamination, but the issue is, what we do know is that particles often can be toxic. Particles are tiny, 1/100th of the diameter of a human hair, so that's really tiny. And they're everywhere in a house, in the air and settled, so they're in the cracks, on the floorboards. I mean, so a typical cleaning is going to, remove some stuff, but it's not going to get everything. One person that I trust a lot is Joe Hughes, who does a lot of training in restoration. They do a lot of fire restoration. They have a radio show called IAQ Radio. It's a great resource. But his suggestion was get in there with a leaf blower. And, I mean, obviously, in my house, I'd have to put some things away before I use the leaf blower. But basically, start from the ceiling, have a powerful exhaust fan, and basically blow things out. But you want to do this with like a professional respirator, possibly tie that coveralls. I mean, this isn't something you casually do with a pink dust mask. And this is the kind of stuff that if Norfolk Southern is covering cleaning, they should be doing. They should be making sure that there are no particles. And the thing is, some of those particles were probably there before the train derailment. Well, fine. They need to clean them all. You're not going to be able to separate them. And there could easily be stuff as a result of, people saw the black soot. There's been stuff cracked. So it just seems like that level of cleaning, and there needs to be clarification. And I would think that the clarification should come from representatives of the community, of possibly the state and federal EPA, but also just knowledgeable folks regarding public health to address. I mean, precautionary principle is so critical. That is, if it's irreversible, you need to make sure you do no harm. And that level of cleaning, the guy that uses a particle meter in order to clear that building until the particles were down to a base level. I mean, there are things that you could write up as a standard. You could then see, does that house no longer smell? Does the person no longer experience symptoms? I mean, that might be more meaningful than trying to say that you could measure the precise things. So absolutely, we should try to measure what we can measure. But I just think there needs to be a collective agreement on a standard that tests for how clean is a house. And it needs to really get to the stuff that's hidden. And the stuff that, to some extent, there might be carpet that needs to be thrown away. Some furnishings might be able to be blown out. There are ways of cleaning things, but at the same time, I think of the lead clearance stuff, which normally is not done in an occupied house with a lot of furnishings. It's usually done in an empty building. But I think there are solutions that way. And it should be requested and demanded and done collaboratively with your input.
I think something else that's important to note too is the need for long-term medical monitoring and testing. And I know this is something that Ohio Rally Organizing is already advocating for, but we see that across the board with communities that experience any kind of contamination. It was the same in West Virginia with the DuPont issues and the water contamination. Groups are organizing to do the same thing in North Carolina around the Chemours plant and the contamination in their water from PFAS. We need long-term monitoring. It's not enough just to have doctors there currently. It needs to be monitored long-term for the community so that the companies can be held responsible for the actions.
Yes, they need to be held responsible, definitely.
And there is, guidelines that the EPA can and has used in the past to require companies to pay for medical monitoring testing long-term. So we really need to advocate for that long-term monitoring, not just now, but down the line, right? Because unfortunately, we can't change what's already happened in terms of exposure, but we can at least monitor what that exposure means to make sure that people's medical costs and things like that are covered and not a hindrance to people.
cleanup of building after a disaster, but I'm thinking about, like, I mean, some of what Linda was saying, I totally agree with. I mean, I don't know about the leaf blower and all that, because it's, I don't know, but like, yes, basically getting air exchanges out, so if you're worried this, and I'm trying to think about like, what is the route for the stuff to be still there, because it's been a while, right? And,
Yeah.
you know, the air in your house isn't always the same air in your house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Right, and so, you know, if it's stuck to some surfaces and coming off the surfaces, like, you know, really aggressively sort of ventilating the house, right? Like, especially places where things might get stuck. I don't know, my house doesn't have ductwork, and so like, yeah, so my house is old and it doesn't have ductwork, and sometimes in like certain corners, like 3 days after I cook something, I can smell it. So definitely like, you know, today's pretty nice, like getting the windows open and running, you know, a bunch of fans, especially in the corners where things stick around, you know, is probably a good idea. You know, and then if it's persisting, then that means there's some source, right? And I don't think you have to throw all your stuff away. That sounds pretty extreme. But you know, but it has to, you know, if you keep smelling it or if it keeps being there, it has to come from somewhere, right? And so you can ventilate it out, but if you, let's say you really do that aggressively and it keeps smelling, then, you know, trying to figure out where it's coming from. And maybe then it's when you like want to have your soil tested or something like that.
So that's what we're asking for, but our house was very bad at first. And then after we opened the windows, it was a few nice days after we were back. But then at night, a lot of times when the ductworks are down there working, that's when, even with the windows closed, we smell a lot of stuff. And that's when it rains, like it's raining out now, we'll probably have a very bad smell up by the house. And that's.
So you're saying inside or outside or both?
Well, no, because it does, even though we have double pane windows, like I say, when they're down there working at night, whatever they're doing, because I'm very close, that's when I can smell at night. I'll wake up, even my grandson, the 16-year-old, and he doesn't say too much, Grandma, it stinks, and it was inside the house. That's been going on like periodically. Like I say, when they're down there working at night, which they do, and I have rode down there before because I check that place out a lot, looking to see what they're doing, and it's terrible down there. I start getting an instant headache from being down there. But even by my house, like I say, you can smell, sometimes worse, sometimes not so bad.
Yeah. Okay, so it's going to be worse at night.
Right.
Basically because the 2-minute version of this is there's a lid on the atmosphere and it's like down near the ground at night, and in the day it's up higher. So anything you do to like emit stuff near the ground is more concentrated at night. And so to whatever extent that like, because they're digging up all this dirt, right?
Right, they're
The
down
railroad
there,
ties
yeah,
out,
right.
the smell, railroad ties can smell for like decades, they're gross. You know, whatever they're disturbing, if that's putting things out that are things you can smell, it's gonna be worse at night because there's just less room to dilute it all. You know, so probably at night is not the time you wanna be running all the fans. I mean, so someone brought, I'm assuming that's Linda, the box fan. So there's a whole bunch of designs online. So like, very simply, you can just like strap one filter to the fan, but there are designs to do like 4, because then it's less burden on the fan. And those are getting rid of particles. I mean, most of probably what you're smelling are gases, so the filter's not gonna do a great job at that. But if you buy, I don't know, like, sometimes, I recently bought a bunch of furnace filters, and some are like grayish, because they say like carbon impregnated.
Right.
Like those probably would work better, which I don't know what better means though, right? Better than 0.
Better than none at all, I guess.
Yeah, and so, you know, especially if like at night you're getting that, you might want to build one of those. It's called a Corsi Rosenthal box. You know, it costs like $100 to buy all the parts. The version with just the box fan and the filter is like probably what, $40. And you know, maybe if it's smelling at night, then you run it then, and at least you're catching some of the stuff. Again, if you get one of the carbon impregnated filters.
But you could also
Which
put
is-
this in a window with the
Yeah,
filter on it,
Push it.
and it could be that it will take care of some of the odor, it might not, but you could, you know, put the carbon filter on and see how that works. But, I mean, lots of people want to open their windows at night because another option is to create a clean room. So get stuff out of one room and create a clean room. And then, I mean, if you have a clean room and you're not having you're not experiencing anything, then slowly bring things back in. But you just, I mean, you need to experiment. Some things can easily be put in a dryer and can be dried without, and that might get rid of some of the volatiles that have been absorbed, particularly if you put it on, give it a little bit of heat, that might dry them out a little faster. So it's just challenging.
It is
Very
very,
challenging.
it is, it is.
But there needs to be a collective response that provides good direction. That's what's needed.
Thank y'all very much. Thank you, Stephen. Do we have any questions?
What are the thoughts about the high school?
Okay.
The house, the safety of the high school and the school.
So, would anyone like to speak to that, the examination in high school, and whether or not it is safe for students to be attending said school, or is that?
Could you repeat the question?
The question was regarding the safety of the high school and whether or not it is actually safe for the students to be in there regarding contamination.
I had a question about that. Maybe you all can answer this. I've heard that there are these creeks that run through the town, and that in some places the buildings are built on top of the creek. Is there a creek that runs under the high school?
Folks are shaking their heads no. Is there,
Okay.
Anna, do you know?
But there is several really close by the school.
There are a number that run by the school, but not under the school.
Okay. Okay. Because the volatile chemicals that were in the creek will clearly evaporate, and you'll get volatile chemicals in the air around the creeks. Now that's why they were aerating them as these creeks went through the town. I don't know what the concentration of chemicals is now or what it was then when they were aerating. I'm not even sure if they're continuing to aerate, but that certainly would have posed a risk to not just the students in the school, but to everybody in the town as those chemicals were being treated there.
The impacted creeks aren't close to the school.
So in terms of schools, even if the building's completely clean to begin with, every day that a bunch of kids come in, you're tracking stuff. So you really need a means of letting kids bring a second pair of shoes and leave their walking shoes separate from the shoes in the building, just so you're not continually bringing stuff into the school. But I really question whether or not the school was properly cleared completely, including the HVAC system, all surfaces, to a level of, like with the lead clearance test, you run something like a Swiffer over a certain area and you see whether or not it shows up white or not. Well, I mean, it's a very inexpensive test to do, and be very easy to do a cleaning and then see whether or not they indeed cleaned it well enough. So, but it's not a matter of cleaning it once because you've got continual exposure to stuff. So it's a matter of adopting practices that are going to clean and on an ongoing basis. But I do think tracking is a huge issue.
Another question that would help me to understand, maybe be able to provide some more information, is whether the school is downwind from the burn, the intentional burn. Would the smoke and the gases from that have gone towards the school?
So maybe you folks know.
No,
The school is west of the burn, right? Yeah, so the school is typically upwind, so here the wind is gonna come typically from the west or the southwest, so on any particular day that can be different, but in general, the school is upwind of all of this. And
Alright.
given that,
That's a good thing.
my my intuition is that the null hypothesis would be that the school is probably fine, and that you would have to prove that it's not, right? And I understand that, like, this whole thing is scary and all of that, and so I don't wanna, like, and I understand, like, I don't wanna discount how people's lived experiences, but I think, you know, it's easy to be afraid of things, and the best way to deal with that is to have information, and if you're, you know, I think if people are worried about the school, then there should be a way to test the school, but I think without other information saying that the school is directly impacted, I think, you know, you start with the assumption that it's safe. That's my opinion.
And if students have symptoms when they go to school?
So, if the school's safe, then why is a good handful of kids going online schooling? And when I went to school, actually, I'm homeschooling now because every time I went to school, I had severe headaches and I felt nauseous. If it's safe, why do we feel like that when we go to school? Also, when a school's first opened, there was still a very bad smell in there. Like, why was the school even open in the first place until we figured out what was in the air? How's that fair to us? And the kids, I feel bad for some of the kids that don't have a choice to really homeschool, because why should they have to get headaches every day to go to school? I just don't get that.
Well, I would just comment on that that says a lot. If it's a real experience of the students in the school, is a number of them are having these headaches and odors of air, that speaks to something. And while I don't know who the other gentleman was who was commenting, but if there's no information on the chemicals or the potential chemicals in the air, if testing hasn't been done of the dust or the air in the school, then the lack of information doesn't mean that it's safe. Lack of information means we don't know. And so I think that in these kind of situations, when there are concerns and people are coming forward with these kinds of complaints, then that should trigger some kind of testing, some kind of an analysis that provides information. Otherwise, it's my opinion versus the next guy's opinion, and nobody really knows. But if you all are experiencing, if the students are experiencing symptoms, then that speaks to something that needs to be addressed. And I don't know if any testing's been done in the school. I haven't seen anything if it has been. So I think that's important.
Can I add something to that? I live in East Palestine. I was down there the night it happened, 3 in the morning, covering it. We all focus on, I'm going to call it what it is, it's not a controlled burn, it's an uncontrolled burn, because you can't control a burn outside in the environment, okay? Now, when this happened to 3rd, okay, we're all focusing on the controlled burn, what was downwind. Now, I know when I was down in the 3rd, the smoke was blowing, that direction towards the school. So we're always focused on downwind from the burn. What about the night of the derailment? All of them chemicals burning. And when they cleaned the school, they cleaned the main hallways of the school. They did not clean every classroom. And this was done by Norfolk Southern. And we see how they do their, house clean. They come in and spray disinfectant and say your house is clean. So, you guys are all focused on downwind. What about the night of the derailment? The, smoke blowing that way.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So another thing I want to point out, so when we have the statement that we read for the school, says that, that basically the biggest thing that they highlight is the cleaning of the filters in the school. And what exactly does that do? And it was like, this is a week after the derailment. We didn't even know what was done, what pollutants were out there at that time. We still don't really know, but at least we have a better idea of what is. So now we're like, so how would you be able to even clean that because of that? And the second point I have is more of a scientific thing. You talked about a null hypothesis, and I want to ask like safety towards null hypothesis, and given students like symptoms, how does that change the null hypothesis?
Yeah, so, no. A couple things. So, when I was saying downwind, I mean at the time, right, not sort of generically, so I wasn't, so.
Okay, well, I was
wasn't
just saying,
looking-
everybody's
Yeah.
focused on the controlled burn, you know?
Yeah.
Which way the wind was blowing that way. Well, when I was down there the night of the derailment, I mean, it was wicked. It was all through town. Smoke was blowing, you know, multiple directions because the wind was changing. I know what it smelled, you know, I know it burned your eyes, your nose, you know. So, I mean, we're all focused on everything they ask is always, you know, after the controlled burn. What about the night of the derailment when all them chemicals were burning? You know, it was, I didn't know what to say. When I was down there filming it, I didn't know, I was speechless because it was something that just, you can't, you know, say in words because it was, you know, so drastic. You know, I wouldn't think that would happen in, you know, my town. If somebody told me I was covering a train derailment, you know, a month from now, I would have laughed at them, you know? And so when they're always focused on stuff, it's always after the burn. Well, what about before the burn? You know, when the wind was blowing pretty much all through town, because I know town had the haze all through it. So that was just my point. You know, I'm not.
Yeah, and thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, and whoever said, the young lady in the red sweatshirt, that people are having symptoms, right? So like, you know, that's, as the gentleman on Zoom said, that's, you know, someone's experience, right? And so I think that's evidence that would suggest, right? So what I was saying was in the absence of other evidence, right? But if people are going to the school and showing up with headaches, then, you know, then you should probably be testing the school. I don't know how they clean the filters. You know how they clean the filters in the commercial building?
They replace them, but
Yeah, okay, so
that's not enough.
I mean, I think the other thing that's important is to just remember to trust your gut. I think part of it is we're all like speculating right now. Like, I don't think any of us can really say, yes, it's safe, or no, it's not safe, because part of it is not having that information. And not everyone who's talking about this or working at these agencies or politicians, like, they're not all experiencing it. So I think, you know, trust your gut. If you're experiencing those symptoms, there probably is something wrong, and this is, you know, why it's important to speak up. Unfortunately, like, you know, as a public health professional, I would love if it was the opposite, if we wanted to make sure things were safe before we did them, but unfortunately that's not always the society we live in, so just don't second guess yourself, is I guess what I would say.
I'd like to add one thing, if I can, about that, and that is that can I go ahead, or is it not? Okay, I just wanted to add that one of the things I've learned over all these years, going back to my days at Love Canal, was that often the scientists who are evaluating these situations, you know, use what they know and the best information that they have to try to evaluate what's going on. And what I've seen in practice is that the science says one thing and the reality of what people experience is different. And I think one of the reasons for that is that most of the science we have is looking at one chemical at a time and evaluating the risks or